This week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, with agriculture broadcaster Orion Samuelson and yours truly, Max Armstrong, and featuring agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier. This week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone.
Coming up on this weekend's broadcast, it almost seemed like a normal cattle industry convention. Hello, everyone. We welcome you to our weekly visit here on This Week in Agribusiness. Mr. Pearson, one thing came to my mind this week. It was the anniversary of the big Iowa derecho.
It certainly was. I've got a lot of friends, of course, in Iowa. A lot of them were sharing their stories, their recollections of just 1 year ago, August 10th, when that derecho tore across so many states here in the Midwest, Max.
And really turned things around for the movement of the grain market, didn't it?
It did. You know, that central part of Iowa that was devastated, that supplies a lot of corn going for ethanol and obviously animal feed as well, Max.
I would imagine more than a few folks had flashbacks this week because they received storms anew. I mean, there were some very powerful winds and, again, very heavy rains in parts of the Midwest U.S.
That's right. It's that time of year, of course, it is thunderstorm season, and they are there this year. A lot of folks thankful for the rain, Max, but concerned about crop damage, and hail continues to be an issue.
Ryan Martin in northern Indiana posted that his corn crop got blasted last year, and I think his soybeans got hit this year.
Oof. Yeah, some folks can't catch a break.
Yeah, it's really bad when those crops look good, too.
Yeah. It is.
Can't quite get them finished. Well, this week at the Cattle Industry Convention, we talked about a lot of things. Randy Block was there from Cattle Facts and shared a few minutes with us. He said it's starting to become a different picture after a rough ride for the folks in the cattle industry.
Well, I would say it's cautiously optimistic. You know, we've gone through a lot in the cattle industry here, not having enough shackle space the last 18 months and working through the backlog that was created with COVID. And we can just start to see the nose of the plane starting to pick up. We're working through the front end supply. Demand is phenomenal. I mean, when you got demand at a 33-year high, you have to be optimistic, and I think producers are starting to see that.
On that demand front, we've saved a lot of money in America over the past year, and some folks are spending it. A lot of traveling going on right now. Other expenditures have been made, buying automobiles when they can. What's the look of consumer demand for beef here over the next year or so?
Well, I think you have to be optimistic when you look at the overall situation. We were closed out of so many markets with restaurants closed down in most of 2020. We saw the upswing in that in the spring of 21 as these restaurants started to open up. You could see that in where wholesale beef prices moved to, the second highest prices in history. Again, we saw it across all protein prices. Now we have exports picking in. We have consumers around the globe that love our product. We've got the highest quality beef product in the planet, and they love grain-fed beef. So it looks like beef exports will be up 15% and record high this year. So it's not just the domestic customer, it's the global customer that is voting with their wallet book.
Randy says that backlog of cattle from those packing plant closures last year still hasn't totally been worked through, but he's optimistic that it will soon be. Oh, and those packer profit margins, yes, they have been huge indeed. And Randy commented to me.
I think the message for producers out there is this. When you have demand this high and we have that much packer profitability, as things come back in balance, that money is going to shift back from the packers back to the producer pockets. And we're very close to seeing it's actually starting to move right now.
It's beginning to move that direction right now.
It is. It definitely is. We've got calf prices that are about $25 a hundred higher than they were a year ago. Feeder cattle prices the same. Fed cattle prices are starting to break out. We've been 17 weeks in here plus or minus 120. And we're just in the process of breaking out of that. So we've got some better times ahead for the producers, and boy, we need it.
Randy says, contrary to what many people think, the markets have been working in his view. He said it's just been very unfortunate that there have been far more cattle than packing capacity at times.
I would just be very cautious that the last thing we really want to do, in my opinion, I've been doing this 40 years, is to invite the government in to fix this problem. I mean, I think that would be a terrible long-term mistake for the U.S. cattle and beef industry, particularly when you look at what's going on. The message is clear. We've got beef demand at a 33-year high. That didn't happen just by happening. That was very intentional with the industry focused on quality, focused on giving the consumer what they wanted, and the consumers have responded. Again, we've got the highest quality beef cow herd and product that we've ever put on the market, 83% choice and prime. Max, when you and I both started, we were producing 50% choice and prime, and heck, we had no clue. It was the flip of the coin on what we were really producing. So, been a major, major change for our industry.
Randy Block, CEO of Cattle Facts for the past 20 years, says yes, there sure are some good times ahead. He believes, Mike, there'll be some profitability for all the folks throughout the beef cattle industry.
Well, profitability in all the beef sectors would be welcome, but it looks like they might have to struggle with some higher feed prices in the short term. Let's talk markets. Joining us this week is Brian Hoops from Midwest Market Solutions. And Brian, earlier this week we had the August supply and demand estimates come out from USDA. And the big surprise, at least to me, was the drop in this new crop corn yield, dropping it down nearly 5 bushels. Brian, is this the breakout to the upside that corn growers have been waiting for?
Yeah, I think it is, Mike. It was a real surprise to the trade. They were expecting about a 2.1 bushel per acre drop from the USDA number. And the USDA has been so conservative this year. I thought they would be conservative in this report as well. So I'm surprised at this number. I did think they'd bring the yields down because that 179.5 is just really not achievable. The all-time record was set a couple years ago at 176.4, and it just didn't seem like we had the perfect growing season to move that yield above that all-time record. So to get down underneath it, it's certainly justified, I think, given the crop problems we've had in different parts of the country this year. I am surprised they dropped it this aggressively until waiting till yield data. This is only like the third time that they haven't actually gone out and did field samples. That'll come next month. So this is more based off of farmer surveys and satellite imagery. Next report, we will have actual survey plots being done and being harvested. So we'll have probably a different calculation method that could give us different yield numbers. But the numbers that we have today certainly are bullish to the corn market. It tightens balance sheets up to where the trade had kind of expected. So that number, ending stocks number 1.24, right in line with where everyone had thought the USDA would be. That really wasn't a surprise. It's these yield numbers dropping as quickly as they did. That's a big surprise. The soybean numbers here, really not much of a surprise, kind of just a follower of the corn.
Gotcha. Well, and on that corn side, of course, this past week we also had the data from the EIA, the Energy Administration, taking a look at ethanol production. We actually saw the lowest ethanol production since May, but we did bring down stockpiles a little bit. It certainly sounds like the higher cash prices in the countryside might be crimping ethanol production a touch. Is that something you're keeping an eye on?
Right. We've kind of leveled out our ethanol production. We ramped up when the economy started opening up, but since that time frame, things have more of a level, even playing field. We just haven't had that surge in production once again, and it's likely due to the higher corn prices, margins being squeezed a little bit. So yeah, as long as we have high gas prices, I think there'll still be decent demand for ethanol, and especially as we go into harvest. I think the basis levels will narrow up quite a bit as we still try and produce more ethanol going forward here and rebuild some of those inventory levels.
Absolutely. So, Brian, after this week's movement, when we finally, it would appear to be that we're breaking this corn market out of its long-term consolidation period, how aggressive should growers be getting some sales on the book before the combines start to roll?
Yeah, I don't want to be overly aggressive. I think there is some crop problems in Brazil that's going to translate into stronger U.S. exports down the road. It's going to take some time. I think the USDA will be very conservative in their balance sheets as far as reflecting that. So while you go into harvest, there's some really good opportunities. There's well over $5 cash off the combine in a lot of areas, depending upon your basis. That's something I want to take advantage of. If you do have to deliver corn, deliver soybeans at harvest, take advantage of that, try and store the rest of the crop, and then we'll use some option strategies, some hedging strategies to manage the risk going from there.
And do you still like option strategies, even with the volatility that's been created by this USDA report?
Yeah, the option strategy, a lot of producers like to buy calls, buy puts. and they have become much more expensive this year with the increased volatility. When the volatility heightens, that means the CME increases margin requirements, that increases the cost of these options. So actually selling options, even though it's a volatile market, you can take in quite a bit of premium right now if you're willing to accept that risk. So that's another strategy you can employ. So I think they're still useful tools, but you have to really manage your risk and know what you're doing.
You certainly do, and we'll be back with more markets with Brian Hoops. This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by the Soybean Checkoff. Tips, videos, how-tos, and more. If it has to do with ag tech, you'll find it in the Tech Tool Shed, your unbiased one-stop resource. And we're back talking markets with Brian Hoops of Midwest Market Solutions. And Brian, one of the surprises on this USDA supply and demand report was that the spring wheat crop apparently didn't get any smaller. That seems a little surprising to me.
It was a surprise to me. It was a surprise to the trade as well. So if you look at just the spring wheat numbers, they were virtually unchanged from last month. Remember, last month, USDA first yield estimates for the year dramatically cut spring wheat production. We had a big rally in spring wheat unfold. This month, we were expecting another cut in production. They left it virtually unchanged, which is hard to imagine. A lot of the clients that we're talking with are actually zeroing out or just scathing their crop and doing something else with it. So they're really kind of just abandoning this crop. And so I think it will be reflected, but it could be in the small grains report at the end of September. That's certainly a possibility when the USDA may make another update to the spring wheat crop. But if you look at the overall wheat crop, it's the smallest in 19 years. So we're producing a small spring wheat crop here, but also Canada's having a smaller crop. Russia's having some crop issues. European nations, the Black Sea wheat regions also having some production issues, and that is going to tighten up our world balance sheets. And the USDA accounted for that in the report. It dropped about 8 million metric tons from the previous report. And that's a pretty tight world stocks number. So our stocks in the U.S. still, they're tighter than they have been in the last 5 years. But in relatively speaking, it's that world number that's really attracting some attention and drove wheat prices higher.
Gotcha. Turning our look over to the soybean market, we did see USDA lower the expected yield. They dropped it just shy of a bushel, down to 50 bushels even. Brian, I mean, that seems to have been the biggest shock, I suppose, in the soybean number. What did you take away from the USDA?
Yeah, there wasn't much in the way of any surprises for soybeans, and there hasn't been for quite some time for the soybean market. They left ending stocks virtually unchanged. Yield numbers came down just slightly. USDA was probably a little optimistic at 50.9, but they always say soybeans are a crop of August, so we could rebound if we have good rains, good weather, could help this soybean crop out and at least stabilize it at this level. But any way you look at it, 155 million bushels is what the USDA said as far as new crop ending stocks. That's a historically tight number, and we are seeing China come in and be fairly aggressive buyers. We've heard they've bought as much as 30 cargoes of U.S. soybeans, and we see export sales report to China seemingly every day. So our weekly sales are starting to pick up, and that's what we'd love to see.
They certainly are. Well, Brian, Max was down in Nashville at the cattle convention earlier this week. Got to get your thoughts on the cattle market. Are we starting to see profitability really return to the cattle feeder? What are you looking for here longer term for live cattle?
I think long-term perspective, the numbers are going to tighten. We've probably gone through the largest numbers through the summer months in here, and these numbers are going to slowly tighten as we go into the later stages of the third quarter, into the fourth quarter. That should regain our profitability. The cash markets have been stagnant. I think we've traded in a $4 range for the last 20 weeks, and we're just left with real stagnant cash markets. But futures have anticipated we're going to raise the cash, $10, $12, $15 as we go through the winter months, and that's what we are expecting, the cash to come up that much.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that in the cattle market. Brian Hoops, Midwest Market Solutions, thanks for joining us.
Chad Colby's look at agriculture technology comes your way next, brought to you by the IBM Watson Decision Platform, combining AI with Internet of Things data to help agribusiness increase yields, improve quality, and drive sustainability.
Is it possible to have new technology for a 40-year-old tractor? Well, more than 40. I think it's 44 years old. Chad Colby tells us about a star that's coming back to the Farm Progress Show.
Have you seen in person the world's largest ag tractor? Hi everyone, I'm Chad Colby, and I'm so excited on this tech segment to share a little bit of news about the world's largest ag tractor. As you might know, last year this tractor got a lot of press because the old tires, which essentially made the tractor basically useless, got replaced with some new technology from Titan Goodyear. And it got the world's largest ag tire, which only seems fitting. Now, the plan last year was, after the tires got put on, have this tractor on display at the Farm Progress Show in Iowa. Seems only fitting. It's spent the last several years in a museum in Clarion. I had the opportunity to personally check out this tractor, and I was there when they did the tire swap. And it was pretty exciting because this tractor is iconic. It was built in 1977. Has over 1,100 horsepower, 1,000-gallon fuel tank, and it's just awesome to see in person. Many of you had the opportunity to check it out on the Farm Progress Show's virtual experience last year. But when the virtual experience was over, the real tractor got loaded up on a truck and headed back to Montana. They used it in the field some, and then it was on a permanent display. Well, I've got some great news. That tractor is going to be moved later this month to the 2021 Farm Progress Show, where you'll get an opportunity, most likely for many of us, for the last time to see it in person. Definitely another great reason to attend this year's Farm Progress Show. But before you get to the show, you might want to go out to YouTube. Type in Big Bud 747 and check out the videos they made last year of this tractor in the field, because nothing sounds like that 1,100 horsepower Big Bud. Max, I know you've heard the Big Bud in person as well.
I've been up in the cab of Big Bud. The Williams brothers really make that tractor sing. By all means, you'll have a chance to see it at the Farm Progress Show. A little bit later on in this weekend's broadcast, we'll answer some of the frequently asked questions about the Farm Progress Show and the half century of progress. Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. One thing that occurred to us at the Cattlemen's Convention this past week was all of the work that still needs to be done in the halls of Congress. Of course, there's that infrastructure bill that still hasn't been pushed over the finish line. The cattlemen are watching it closely because there's some things of concern to them. For one thing, there were things they wanted to keep out. And then they're glad to have some things in that bill, Mike.
Yeah, a lot of negotiations going on in Washington, D.C.
And behind the scenes, there's much that takes place with members of the staff of members of the House and Senate. I asked Allison Rivera about that. She's the Executive Director of Governmental Affairs with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association.
It's been great, though. A lot of them that we have worked with, they have listened and they understand where we're coming from. Some of these members, are out there and they do come from ag, and it's great. And I think that we have had a really great opportunity to work with some really great staffers, House and Senate side, and just excited to continue to work this issue of transportation, which will probably never be a conversation we don't have. Just continuing to work with those offices that recognize that whether you're hauling livestock or other goods, making sure that we have roads and bridges in good shape, and making sure that we have flexibilities is part of this big picture that we're all supportive of.
Will we see results out of the countryside and improvements of roads and bridges, those farm to market arteries?
I certainly hope so. We're pleased to see this package. We're also pleased that there's funding in it for rural broadband. This is something that we have continued to talk about. We will continue to talk about. Our producers are being asked to do more and more every day, and that is part of running a small business. If you're being asked to do more, you need to have high-speed connectivity. We've continued to talk about this issue, and we will continue to be talking about this issue. We want to make sure that that money that's in this package does get where it needs to go for that infrastructure.
Members of the House and Senate get home in the summer. Some of them will be at county fairs and state fairs. Share with me a little bit the importance of that contact between the member of the NCBA and that member of Congress.
Absolutely. So we really hope that our producers, when these especially our senators, go home, that they're talking to these members of Congress and telling the things that are on their mind. There's a lot going on in our industry right now. One of the things that we hope that members will go out and talk to members of Congress about is our labor needs, not only at the packing plants, but all the way down the supply chain to our cow-calf producers. So we're going to continue to push our membership, especially during this August month, to make sure that they are out there talking about the concerns on the ground, particularly in this immigration labor space.
You're talking about help, for example, in feedlots, cow-calf operations?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we need them throughout the supply chain, and in the past we may not have talked as much about the need at the packing plants, but that's continued to be an issue that keeps coming up, and so we need to make sure that the senators are hearing from us. The House passed the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. That bill doesn't necessarily work for us. What we want is H-2A to be a year-round program and no cap, and so that's the message that we want our members to be delivering to their senators during this House, let's say, work period when they're at home.
Is that possible? Can it be accomplished? It seems like this has been such a long road.
This is always a hard conversation. NCBA also has policy to support border security. And there was a bill that was introduced in the last few weeks to compensate producers that have seen detriment to their property at the border. And so we are very supportive of that as well. What we want these senators to understand is we are supportive of both the need for labor, meeting that labor need, and also securing the border. And why can't we do them in tandem? It doesn't have to be one and then the other. We really need to focus on both and work towards it.
Sometimes I think there's the feeling that maybe organizations in agriculture work in their own silo. The corn growers here, the pork producers here, the cattle industry here. Do you work back and forth, support each other, get together on common causes?
Absolutely. So on this labor shortage, this is across the industries, right? So we're working with our friends in turkey and pork and our sheep friends and making sure that we all have the workers that we need. So I think when we team up on issues like this, it really does help for us to speak with one voice.
As I visited with Allison, I couldn't help but recall how it used to be in Washington, how members of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party would work together in those nonpartisan efforts. I would imagine it has to be much more difficult these days.
I think it is, Max, though this infrastructure bill that Allison mentioned is a test of that bipartisanship in order to get this thing across. Taking a look at this infrastructure bill, it was passed through the Senate on Tuesday, and this was a bipartisan bill. It was scaled down from Joe Biden's initial $2 trillion recommendation to about $548 billion. Of that, $200 billion is allocated for transportation, with the bulk of it, of course, going to roads and bridges, including bridge repair, which is huge in rural communities for a lot of folks. Our friend Mike Steenhoek at the Soy Transportation Coalition sent out a note after this passed and said that a rural community with one weight-restricted bridge, if that bridge gets repaired, that could save as much as $70,000 to $80,000 for a lot of these places in an annual basis. So this is a huge deal for rural America. Also had some funding in there for bridges and ports and waterways, about $100 billion going for that. But it's not done. And this is where the struggles in Washington, D.C. are continuing. This bill has passed the Senate, but it has no companion bill in the House. And a lot of us remember Schoolhouse Rock. We need both the Senate and the House version. Then they conference. We don't have that House version. Speaker Nancy Pelosi wants to package a big infrastructure bill with their $3.5 trillion economic plan that they want to pass through budget reconciliation. And that's going to be a little bit more controversial, Max. So I don't think we're done hearing about this. But it was nice, I think, for a lot of folks who watch Washington to see some of that bipartisan activity come back.
Yeah, there's still some things happening. There's still some work that's getting done there. But as Allison pointed out, it's important to have that one-on-one conversation with the lawmaker who represents you.
Absolutely.
There's more coming up on this weekend's edition of This Week in Agribusiness. We'll answer some of those frequently asked questions about the upcoming shows.
This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone.
Thanks a lot for joining us for this weekend's This Week in Agribusiness. Our friend Willie Vogt is wandering the countryside, checking on crops.
He is, and it's not a wander. It is a 3-week whirlwind tour in 9 different states. He is on the DeKalb Winning Has Roots tour, taking a look at places around the country. This week, he was in Gothenburg, Nebraska, looking at utilizing water in a drought.
Everybody talks about the weather, but so few people do anything about it. We're in Gothenburg, Nebraska today as part of the Winning Has Roots tour, And we're talking to Brian Olson, who's the research lead at the Water Utilization Learning Center that Bayer operates here. They run a lot of corn and soybean hybrid trials here, and it's very interesting to see what they're doing. But you know what? Brian's even controlling the rain. Let's hear what they're working on.
The Learning Center was put out here out in the western production corn belt because we really wanted to have a site to evaluate stress, right? So we have 200 acres of irrigated corn production where we have variable rate irrigation technology where we can evaluate basically full irrigation versus 50% irrigation versus dry land, looking at the system all on that same piece of ground. So really unique tools that allow us to understand what is really going to be the big drivers for that corn system and provide the most value for our farmers. Then behind me, we also have what we would call our rainout shelter. And this rainout shelter allows us to do some unique things that we would not typically get to do out in the field. And that would be to eliminate rainfall from the equation, but we're still evaluating moisture stress. So when rain comes, it actually closes the building up over top of the plots, and then it opens back up automatically. But the corn plots, we put supplemental irrigation on that through surface drip irrigation system. And so we can stress corn early, we can stress corn late, or we can put on, let's say, an allocated amount. So many of our farmers out west have allocated amounts of water. And so it simulates that type of environment or growing condition for those farmers.
Olson works with a lot of hybrids and varieties here, and he doesn't do stuff that goes right to market. But he did have some insights that growers could use on their own operations when it comes to evaluating the products they may want to plant on their farms.
Evaluating the system, right? Working with our technical agronomist is key. Do they have full irrigation or not? Do they have an allocated amount of water? Do they have a pivot that can put on a significant amount of water very quickly across that pivot? Or is it maybe ratcheted down? Maybe it once pumped 1,000 gallons per minute and now it's only 300 gallons per minute. So it takes a lot longer for that to go across that pivot to put on that inch of water. So you really got to look at what's the ability of that system, right? Is it dry land? Or are you sitting out, let's say, around Grand Island where you got considerably more annual precipitation than you would at Colby, Kansas, right? Those are some things to think about. You evaluate the system, but you got to look at the durability, right? That durability, that's one of the big things that we've seen over the years. We are obviously increasing yield potential in our corn products, but when we evaluate corn products under stress, we are seeing dramatic differences in the ability of our corn products now compared to corn products 20 years ago in it being able to handle stress.
Reporting from the Winning Has Roots tour, I'm Willie Vogt with Farm Progress.
Thank you, Willie. A lot of growers, no doubt, watching for that drought research. Willie's tour will continue for the next 2 weeks. We'll have updates from him here on This Week in Agribusiness as he makes his way to the Farm Progress Show.
Now, agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier brings us his farm weather forecast for the nation for the week ahead. It's presented by Pivot BioProven, the nitrogen-producing microbes that stay put, whether or not.
The guy's a real meteorologist. We've often said he's not just another pretty face.
Yep.
That's true, huh?
Yeah.
We need to get into the weather. I mean, we've had so much rough weather in some areas,
Yes.
and then, of course, there's still those places that are having to contend with the fires.
Right.
Fill us in on what you see from a precip standpoint.
Almost 500,000 acres up in smoke, mind you, by the way, if you take into account Northern California, Washington State, and a fair amount of the Northern Rockies and Pacific Northwest. Down the line, maybe not necessarily this week, but next week, maybe some relief. Short term, some cooler and wetter conditions. But in the meantime, we do have almost this benign front, leftover moisture, daytime heating, dry-based thunderstorm activity. You know the whole drill. Sets off lightning and fires, and that's the story early week here. The heat has been suppressed down across areas of the central and southern plains, and it's pretty much up in smoke here as well relative to crop growth and development, anything to harvest. Don't think there's much to speak of on those spring grain areas of the Dakotas and southern Canadian prairie. But looky here, the start of a slow-moving dip trough in the upper pattern. Cooler air, marine layer air, and ultimately maybe some moisture in off the Pacific, and will kind of condense out what's in the atmosphere into form of some shower and thunderstorm activity all the way down to the ground. And so there are signs of at least the middle to late parts of the week, a subtle pattern shift here. It may ignite storms back into the northern plains, moisture there. probably too late to matter, but it is the start of at least a recharge process that will take weeks and months, by the way, to improve well into the fall season of the Pacific Northwest and Northern Plains. A little spurious leftover piece of tropical energy still has a couple of showers with it in the southwestern part of the country. Small and shrinking area, very hot triple-digit readings across the central and southern winter wheat belt, and again, maybe a dry-based thunderstorm. Central Rockies, at least for this week, the monsoon setup is winding on down. Here's the leading edge of that cooler air with a front across northern California. Pretty typical mid to late August weather back across the Four Corners, central and southern plains too.
Right down through the heart of the country. Should it be a fairly quiet week?
We're hoping. I tell you, boy, it was all or nothing out of some of these storm clusters, these pulsing storms. Almost a look of a derecho, almost a year to the date in some of these storms as they rampage through the Midwest. Cooler, less humid, a fine go of it. The storms are back across parts of the plains, and there are some areas that are now too wet. Others got a good soaking the past week to 10 days. Others still in the midst of a drought through the upper Midwest and northern plains, where here comes the heat and maybe a prod of some triple-digit readings into the far southwestern Corn Belt. Typical stuff, and a couple of more thunderstorms scattered across the northern and eastern Corn Belt, the middle and late portions of the week. The humidity is high. The storms are scattered. The monsoon setup on the southwest is weak this week in the southwestern part of the country. A little bit of a tropical feature here forms up in the Gulf of Mexico. Some weakness that may enhance some of the downpours in the Delta region. Otherwise, as you would expect for August, a couple of thunderstorms, hot, humid weather on the central and southern plains.
This is that time of the year. Tropical activity can have quite an effect along the East Coast. Do you see any?
We do middle to late parts of the week, mid-Atlantic, southeastern states, and at least through the Corn Belt, a better feel as opposed to those 75 to 80 degree dew points. They were off the charts. It was miserable on man and beast, but a far more comfortable go of it early to middle parts of the week. Here is that little tropical piece of energy, remnants of Fred here. Another warm front back to the west, and with thunderstorm clusters on the increase too for parts of the northern and western Corn Belt the second half of the week. Delightful high pressure in air, typical of early autumn for the northern parts of New England. Here is Fred early in the week into the eastern Gulf and a track into the Outer Banks areas the second half of the week with showers and thunderstorms increasing there. Otherwise along the front, daytime heating, plenty of moisture, scattered showers and thunderstorms, typical late summertime in the southeast.
Now, Greg Soye is back with his extended farm weather forecast for the country. Presented by Pivot Bio Proven. Visit pivotbio.com to find a representative near you.
There are still folks who need some rain. That may be surprising to those of you who've had way too much. Greg, where will the moisture occur this next week?
We see it with time later in the week over some of the worst drought areas of the western Corn Belt, upper Midwest, parts of the northern plains. Not a complete pattern shift, but the late beans will certainly appreciate it here. And this is the story this year for the tropics in this part of the country. This is the leftover remnants of Fred up through the Outer Banks later into the week. Downpours continue early on in through Florida. Leftover thunderstorm. Not a great week for the monsoon in the southwestern sections of the country. Quarter to half, it's a start in the Pacific Northwest.
We'll be joined at Rantoul, Illinois by many folks for the half century of progress starting on the 26th. How warm will it be?
Yeah, enough to keep the beverage stands at a pretty decent clip with temperatures maybe close to the 90-degree mark. Not unusual here. Core of the heat in this part of the country. A little bit back to normal here with some cloud cover in the southeastern section of the country. What's noticeable? The trough and the cool off for the Pacific Northwest and northern plains. That's usually a signature of this, a more active weather pattern, and here it is. Moisture on the increase in the Pacific Northwest, northern Rockies. Drought areas, probably too late, but it's a start of the recharge process, and the wet weather continues on in this part of the country with more significant moisture for late planted beans across the Corn Belt.
Decatur, Illinois, on September 1st, Lee Bryce will be there for the Farm Progress Show. That's the second day of the Progress Show. How do you see weather that week?
Yeah, must be summertime, must be farm progress, and it is hot. And maybe some low to mid-90s expected here. Look at the heat from Texas into the St. Lawrence River Valley. That trough begins to work back its way into the Canadian Prairie, so temperatures moderate, and the wet weather is still here. It's better than it's been. Northern sections of the Rocky Pacific Northwest. Monsoon picks up in the southwestern section of the country, and more wet weather tapped into some of this Gulf moisture making its way from the southeast into the Ohio Valley and Great Lakes region.
We're in the week after Labor Day then. Tell us what you see. Cooling off a little?
Yeah, trying to, but that'll be over this part of the country here with the tropics getting active, cloud cover, the hot ridge, still plenty of late summer to go here, continuing to the upper Midwest, northern plains and up towards the Sioux, and the wet weather pattern is gone in the northern plains, western Corn Belt, Pacific Northwest. It returns in monsoon fashion over parts of the Southwest, Texas, Gulf Coast areas, and again, propensity for weather systems to organize in the eastern Gulf over parts of the southwestern sections of the Atlantic and and a point and spread to the north and northeast from there. Wet weather too for the northeast and New England.
Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, spotlighting another great American tractor.
It is true, some folks name their tractors. You met the International named Gramps a couple of weeks ago. This is the Ford named Henry. Max's Tractor Shed is brought to you by Store-Lock Tool Cabinets. Make plans to see them. At the Farm Progress Show and the Half Century of Progress, they will have those products on display. The story of Henry, the Ford 8N on the farm in Missouri, goes back about 7 decades. That spans most of the life of Gene Millard, longtime friend and mentor of many farm broadcasters. Gene was the manager and the farm voice at one time of KFEQ, St. Joseph, Missouri. Well, Gene has this 8N that indeed has been around a long time, but it was just restored about 5 years ago by a neighbor. And Gene will take that tractor out across the farm at planting time, harvest time, various times during the season. Oh, it's underpowered, certainly, for the tasks handled by the big, brawny Case IH tractors on the farm there today. But Henry has superbly served and been appreciated by 4 generations of the Millard family at Osborne, Missouri. Well, let's see what Mark Stock has to show us this weekend as he brings us the Big Iron Report.
Well, hello, Max. We're going to be at the Dakota Fest in Mitchell, South Dakota at the farm show, so make sure you stop on by. And speaking of South Dakota, Roger Seek is retiring, and his equipment is located by Martin, South Dakota. He's got a very big sale, folks, over 208 items. He has 6 John Deere mechanical front tractors, including a John Deere 7930. He's got a John Deere 7810 as well. He's got 2 2011 New Holland H8040 self-propelled windrowers. He also has 3 John Deere round balers. He's got a John Deere 1850-1900 series air seeder with a cart. He's got a Haybuster H1100 tub grinder. He also has a John Deere 750 no-till drill. Roger also has some construction equipment, a Volvo L50C wheel loader. He's got a Ditch Witch 6510 trencher backhoe as well. Plus he's got fence panels and other cattle feeding and livestock equipment. Now we got Steve Schultz retiring in Whitmore, Iowa. He's got a John Deere 9520T track tractor selling. Olaf Christofferson is retiring from Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin. He's got a 2019 Kuhn Knight Slinger manure spreader. More Pork LLC is retiring out of Glidden, Iowa. Check out their New Holland T5 115 mechanical front tractor and their 2016 Barrett Circle B double-deck tri-axle livestock trailer. A real good sale taking place on August 18th, Max, on BigIron.com.
The FFA Chapter Tribute is sponsored by Nationwide, the #1 farm insurer in the country. To register your FFA chapter, go to nationwidesupportsffa.com. That's nationwidesupportsffa.com. Nationwide, we stand for you.
Across the country, schools are getting back into session, which means the work for the FFA state officers is about to kick off in earnest. We're getting to know those state officers from the state of Missouri, and joining us this week is Emily Hoyt. She is the FFA state secretary. Emily, school's getting ready to get back into session. Are you excited to see FFAers in person again?
Absolutely. I think after a year of COVID and a lot of unknowns, all of us on my team, myself included, are very excited to get back into the swing of things and seeing members in the classroom. And we were able to do that a little bit this summer, but really being able to engage with those members through workshops and just the knowledge that we get to bring to them and help them learn and grow in different leadership aspects. I am very excited to get back into the classroom and mingle with those members for sure this year.
You bet. And now, Emily, so a lot of us have never served at the state officer level for the FFA, and I'm curious, what are your duties as state secretary?
So a lot of my duties consist of the same as the rest of the 13 vice presidents in Missouri. One thing that was different for myself, though, is the president and I got to spend a week in Washington, D.C. Delegating for the state of Missouri. So we got to be the spokespeople for all 25,375 Missouri FFA members down there. And we were able to mingle with state officers from all across the nation, which was pretty awesome. But other than that, my duties look a lot lot of the same, going to mingle with members and advocate to legislators and teachers all across the state of Missouri.
That is fantastic. And you are passionate about FFA so much so that you're heading to Mizzou in Columbia and you want to become an ag educator. Is that correct?
That is the plan as of now, yes. The FFA has really opened my passion and purpose for being able to educate others about ag education and our agricultural commodities. So I'm really hoping to get to do that in some way, shape, or form in the very near future. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Emily. This Week in Agribusiness, proud to salute the FFA.
Now, Samuelson Says. Insight and commentary from Orion Samuelson.
If you are a livestock producer, particularly a hog producer, pay attention, because I'm going to share with you a story from the Illinois Farm Bureau weekly newspaper that caught my attention. Let me quote the story. Uncertainty surrounding the implementation of California's Proposition 12 continues as the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit Court recently denied a challenge from the American Farm Bureau Federation and the National Pork Producers Council. The farm groups filed a joint complaint that Proposition 12 is a violation of the U.S. Commerce Clause. Proposition 12 imposes animal housing standards that reach beyond the California borders to farms across the U.S. and beyond. Brian Duncan is a hog farmer from Illinois, and he was quoted because he serves on AFBF's Livestock Working Group as saying, Proposition 12 sure sets up a very challenging situation from the production sector to comply with those regulations and for packers to segregate animals that comply with Proposition 12. Those rules are not consistent with what we know as good animal husbandry practices. They are high-cost models which would make us non-competitive in the export markets. And Brian concluded by saying, modern facilities allow us to treat each sow as an individual. And I'd sure hate to go back to technology 50 years old again. Doesn't make any sense. I agree with that hog farmer, and if you don't know about Proposition 12, better take a look. Be safe, be well. My thoughts on Samuelson Says.
Our email is jammed. The messages are coming in on an hourly basis with questions about the big shows that are just ahead. The Farm Progress Show, but before that, the Vintage Show, the Half Century of Progress. I bet people even ask you about them.
They certainly do, Max. The biggest question I get about the Farm Progress Show is the corn harvest. People want to see it. Is it going to be ready?
Yeah, for that show starting August 31st, the corn will be ready. I was talking with Matt Youngman about it, and of course, Chad Colby was there by the fields just a few days ago. It's right on pace to be ready for harvest at showtime.
Oh, that is fantastic. And if you're talking to Chad Colby, you probably have an update. Any interesting product introductions from this year's show?
You bet. Plan on being there Tuesday morning of the show, August 31st, 8 a.m. is when the gates open, and there will be new introductions all over the show site.
Whew, and I know we've got a concert this year. Lee Bryce is performing. The question I hear is it going to cost me extra?
No, not at all. Your ticket that gets you in on that Wednesday, September 1st, will get you into the concert later on in the day.
All right, all inclusive. And finally, Max, the Farm Progress Show covers a lot of ground. Golf carts. Can I get one?
No, there are no golf carts available yet for the Farm Progress Show. You can bring your own into the show, I'm told.
All right. Well, you mentioned the Half Century of Progress, of course, coming the week prior to Farm Progress Show. Another big expanse. What about golf carts there?
They're all gone for that show, too. But again, you can bring your own. You'll be asked to register it. You'll be asked to sign a waiver. You don't have to have insurance, proof of insurance on it, but you can bring it into the show and have it there each day if you want to.
All right. If you have any troubles, I'm sure there are folks there who can help you get her running again. If I don't have a golf cart, Max, how can I get around?
There will be shuttles. I'm told to be operating about 10 shuttles at a minimum around the showgrounds there at the old air base at Rantoul, Illinois.
Well, that'll certainly help. And if I'm I'm going to the half century of progress. I got to have a place to stay. What are the camping options?
There is dry camping nearby, just to the west, about a block and a half away from the show site.
Perfect. Now, Max, you know I travel a lot with my dog, Mr. Baxter. Can I bring him to the show? Should I bring him to the
Hey,
show?
who's this coming in here right now? Anyway, my goodness. No, we're asking folks, in the best interest of even Fido, too. It just makes sense to leave our, we love our animals so much, but really there's so much noise, there's so much activity, so many people, it's probably best not to bring them to the show. We've had a lot of questions. One came in the other day from grandparents saying, we have a 6-month-old grandchild. Is there the possibility of plugging in a bottle warmer?
Oh, what'd you find out?
Yeah, there'll be electricity around. Oh, now, then we heard about the 75-year-old couple. They had both lost their spouses. They recently married in Ohio, and they're going to honeymoon to Rantoul.
Oh, wow.
No, don't you ask that frequently thought question. One of us will be here next weekend on This Week in Agribusiness. One of us. On behalf of Mike Pierce and Max Armstrong here, hoping you have a great week. So long.
Closed captioning for This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Kubota. Shape your world. This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by Omax Communication in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.